Pain and Gain to me is one of the standout movies of the last few years, primarily because I think it's a successful and illustrative example of a story that is adapted from real-life events. These kinds of works tend to be excellent windows into the creative process, perhaps not as good as improv, where you can witness the entire creative process from start to finish, but you can at least know exactly what the creators started with, and then by comparing that source material to the end result, you can try to reverse engineer the decisions in between. While you could say the same thing about any kind of adaptation, the unique thing about stories based on true events is that real life doesn't have artistic intent. Real life is not a story that somebody wrote just to make a point or convey an idea. So it can be illuminating to look at these kinds of works and see how the creators sculpt those real events into a thematically and aesthetically holistic work with recognizable artistic intent, to create art where essentially there was none before. For a quick example, Spielberg's Catch Me If You Can, based on the memoir of former con artist Frank Abagnale Jr., shows the divorce of Abagnale's parents to be one of the driving factors behind his turn to crime. But the real Abagnale's parents never divorced at all. So why did they divorce in the movie? Whatever the reason, it's probably the same reason that divorced parents feature prominently in E.T., War of the Worlds, actually pretty much any Spielberg movie. We can look at a movie like Pain and Gain in the same way, by looking at how the real story was changed, then trying to figure out why. We can see how this offbeat, truth is stranger than fiction crime story was transformed into a real thematic narrative. Pain and Gain is the story of Daniel Lugo and the son Jim gang, a group of bodybuilders associated with the son Jim, who in the mid-90s committed a series of crimes including the kidnapping and extortion of a businessman who was named Victor Kershaw in the movie, though that wasn't his real name. The son Jim gang's goal was to torture Kershaw into signing over all of his money and possessions, which they successfully did, but after Kershaw recognized his captors, the gang attempted to kill him while making it look like a suicide. They failed to do so, however, even after staging a car accident and running him over. Twice. Things continued to deteriorate from there while getting more and more bizarre. So far, everything I've said is consistent between the movie and real life. But the movie also has quite a few departures from the real story. For example, there's this scene, which I think is the key to understanding the whole movie. In this scene, which is near the beginning of the movie, the eventual ringleader of the Son Jim gang, Daniel Lugo, who is at this point just a personal trainer with a criminal history, attends a seminar put on by self-help guru Johnny Woo, who dazzles the audience with descriptions of his glamorous lifestyle while sharing his secrets for success.
I don't know why God gave us 10 fingers, 'cause we's only gonna need 3. Get a goal, get a plan, and get up off your ass.
The seminar fires up Lugo so much that he decides to come up with a plan of his own.
I'm a doer with a 3-finger plan. Finger 1, find a guy with money. Finger 2, make him give you everything he owns. Finger 3, make America a better place. Leave the guy broke and clueless as to who made him that way.
Now, the real Lugo didn't need any special motivation to come up with this plan. In fact, the self-help seminar was entirely made up for the movie. It never happened. So what's the deal? Why is it in the movie? Is it just supposed to be funny? I mean, the obvious answer is that it gives Lugo's character a more specific motivation to commit the crimes, but let's be real here, they could have come up with any number of reasons if they wanted to. For example, in the movie, Adrian Doorbal, Lugo's right-hand man, joins the scheme because he needs money to pay for injections to cure his steroid-induced impotence. While this has some basis in real life, the real Doorbal did undergo that kind of treatment. That's not the reason he participated in the crimes. So when it comes to Lugo, we can ask, why specifically did they choose to invent a self-help seminar? Well, I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but to really provide a full explanation, I have to talk for a bit about the things that were going through my head when I saw this movie for the first time. One of those things is the work of Dave Barry, the former longtime humor columnist for the Miami Herald. I was reminded of Barry's work partly because the story takes place in Barry's adopted home of Miami, which was often the focus of Barry's columns, and partly because it takes place in the early 90s, when Barry was near the height of his popularity, even with a network sitcom based on his writings. His columns would also frequently involve offbeat news stories like this one, though they were rarely about crime, and to my knowledge he never wrote about the Pain and Gain story itself. But he has published several fictional crime novels since then that have all taken place in Miami and featured bumbling, inept criminals. In retrospect, it seems probable that these works took at least some inspiration from the original Pain and Gain news feature. But really, the main reason I thought of Dave Barry was because of a book he wrote in the mid-80s called Stay Fit and Healthy Until You're Dead. The book was about the explosive popularity of fitness in America, which Barry referred to as the fitness craze. It can be easy to forget, but it wasn't that long before this book was written that the average American didn't have a gym membership, when gyms were mostly populated with boxers and bodybuilders, before home exercise machines and designer workout clothes, before aerobics classes and spin classes and Zumba classes. And what struck me as somebody who read this book in the mid-2000s was how Barry talked about this fitness craze as if it were just a fad that would probably die down in a few years. In hindsight, we can clearly see that didn't happen. Sure, some things have changed. We've swapped out the leg warmers for yoga pants, and we spend a little less time sweating it to the oldies, and a little more time listening to Joe Rogan talk about kettlebells and the virtues of a ketogenic diet. But our fascination with fitness doesn't seem to have diminished at all over the last 3 decades. And why is that? Why is it that other cultural trends have come and gone, while fitness has come to occupy a permanent place in the American psyche? I think the answer lies in the second thing that came to mind while I was watching this movie, which is this clip I'd seen of British comedian Stephen Fry responding to someone who'd asked him about the differences between British and American comedy.
If you go to an American bookshop, by far the biggest section is self-help and improvement. The idea that life is refinable and improvable, and that you can learn a technique for anything, whether it's lovemaking, being a businessman, a marriage, cooking, losing weight. There's an unbelievable sense that life is improvable, that you can be lectured at, or indeed given a sermon at. It's the Protestant base of America.
Fry's observation is an interesting one for sure, and I think it largely rings true. While American culture doesn't have a monopoly on the concept of self-improvement, the two are tied together in a very idiosyncratic way. I mean, this is the culture that produced the idea of the American dream, right? The idea that anyone can start with nothing and climb their way to the top through sheer effort and persistence. That if given the opportunity, anyone can achieve their highest potential. Sounds a lot like fitness, doesn't it? So is it any wonder that this same culture would be at the forefront of the popularization and commodification of fitness as a self-improvement activity?
Because if you're willing to do the work, you can have anything. That's what makes the US of A great. When it started, America was just a handful of scrawny colonies. Now, it's the most buff, pumped-up country on the planet. That's pretty rad.
With this background in mind, it seems to me that the scene with the self-help seminar was created to help expand Lugo's interest in bodybuilding into an interest in self-improvement in general. In the original news articles that comprise the story's source material, Lugo isn't much of a character. He's described as a criminal whose defining feature is that he's also a bodybuilder. The movie's version of Lugo is slightly different in that he's shown to be driven by the broader concept of effort and reward, pain and gain. This manifests itself in multiple ways, including a passion for bodybuilding, but also an interest in self-help seminars and an intense fixation on the American dream.
That's the American dream.
The American dream?
The American dream.
The phrase American dream never appears in the original articles, but it's brought up in the movie over and over again, explicitly, as we just heard, but also implicitly. For example, there's a scene where Lugo goes to a hardware store to admire the riding lawnmowers, while fantasizing about the lawn he doesn't have. In this case, the idea of a lawn is clearly being used as shorthand for the concept of home ownership, which is an essential component of the American dream. After the gang succeeds in stealing Kershaw's house, Lugo gets his lawnmower But he doesn't stop there. He starts coaching the neighborhood boys in basketball. He forms a neighborhood watch. These things didn't happen in real life. They were added to the movie to emphasize the idea that Lugo is chasing some kind of ideal American life, Kershaw's life, which makes sense because Kershaw is essentially living the American dream. In both the movie and real life, Kershaw is an immigrant who came to America, created multiple successful businesses, and became fairly wealthy as a result. He's the kind of self-made man that Lugo wishes he was. I've spent a lot of time talking about Lugo, but we could also look at the other characters, like the one played by The Rock, Paul Doyle. Doyle is a former inmate who moved to Miami looking for a new beginning after kicking drugs and finding Jesus. In the original articles, there was a member of the Sun Gym gang who had basically this same life story, but his background was mentioned briefly in passing and didn't have any real significance. In the movie, however, Doyle's born-again Christianity and Alcoholics Anonymous membership are made out to be his most defining character traits. It's not hard to see why this was done. It's because born-again spirituality and 12-step sobriety programs are yet more forms of self-improvement. And just like get-rich-quick schemes and inspirational self-help gurus, they're not exclusive to American culture, but they are strongly associated with it. The movie even calls attention to their similarities.
Do you know what fear is?
False evidence appearing real?
That's a Johnny Woo line.
False evidence appearing real.
You know Johnny Woo too?
I don't know anything about an Asian guy. That's an AA line. AA started in 1935, Akron, Ohio, and I want no part of this.
Doyle is presented as someone with the same drive for self-improvement as Lugo, it just manifests in a different way. So again, what we're seeing here is that details have been added, removed, changed, emphasized, or de-emphasized in ways that expand the character's bodybuilding interests into a broader interest in self-improvement. That expansion was then also used as a conceptual bridge to the American dream. This does a bunch of different things. For one, it brings some cohesion to the story and provides a simple narrative frame that ties the characters together. There's the man who has the American dream, the criminal who wants to steal it, and the like-minded friends that the thief manipulates into collaborating. The Americana motif makes the movie right at home in director Michael Bay's overall body of work, and the changes also bring an element of satire to the story, which helps the movie achieve its intended tone of dark comedy. And even though it's satire, I don't think the movie is really criticizing the American dream itself as much as Lugo's twisted interpretation of it. For all his talk about how there are no shortcuts to success, we see right away that Lugo has no problem encouraging steroid use in the Sun Gym locker room. The central joke of the movie really seems to be, what if someone took the advice of those self-help gurus and got up off their ass and did something, but the something they decided to do was crime? For me, though, the most important thing these changes accomplish is that they bring some nice thematic flavor to what could otherwise have been a bland, unthematic retelling of the actual events. It seems like a lot of times when we talk about theme, we tend to speak in terms of explicit messages or thesis statements. And if you wanted to, you could certainly find some of those in Pain and Gain. But what makes the movie work for me isn't so much a specific message, as much as it is that the themes impart the movie with a distinct flavor. This is a movie that's American Dream flavored. It's self-improvement flavored, and everything is filtered through those ideas. It's a kind of flavor that most movies, even entirely fictitious ones, either fail to achieve or don't even try. The fact that the movie manages to create this flavor while working within the constraints of the original story, well, for one, it's yet another example of how constraint stimulates creativity. And I also think it's really impressive. It would be very easy to say with the benefit of hindsight, after seeing the movie and seeing how naturally these themes are integrated, that this was the obvious way to treat the material. But I imagine it actually took a great deal of skill and cleverness to find this conceptual through line in the source material, and then to tease that out through creative decisions in the way it was here. If you want to see a neat, transparent, and pretty easy to follow example of the creative process at work, Pain and Gain is a pretty good place to look.